Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today I am going to pick up on a series that I have not visited for quite some time now, and that is a series that I started making a few years back on how the experience of working with ayahuasca over many years and some other general psychedelic or entheogenic ritualistic experiences served to play an important role in my process or development as an astrologer. And part of this has been personal for me. I've wanted to make sure that I catalog and sort of, yeah, just take the time to document some of the ways in which those experiences informed how I think about and do astrology because I haven't been involved in intentional psychedelic work for a long time. And I don't want to lose track of or sort of forget some of the insights and experiences that were so amazing. And as time goes by, it's sort of easy to forget. But also because I think people who watch my channel might be interested to know a little bit about how my view and my approach to astrology was shaped and informed by these experiences. So that is the agenda or goal for this episode today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one very particular ayahuasca ceremony that I had that played a very pivotal role in my development as a young astrologer. And I think is still with me today. And I hope you'll find it interesting. I'm going to issue a few qualifiers before I start because I want to make sure people know that I don't think anyone needs to do psychedelics or drink ayahuasca, or this is not a promotion of those activities. Like if you are or are not called to those things, it's totally fine. And there are also many ways in which we might access alternate states of consciousness that we can learn and grow from other than using entheogens. So I want to make all that clear before I get started, because I know there are some people who listen to this channel who are not necessarily interested in psychedelics, or who may even find them, to be not aligned with their path. So I want to make sure I respect that. I'll say a little bit more about that after we get going here with some promotions. Don't forget to like and subscribe before we get into it today. Share your comments and reflections. I would love to hear your experiences, the kinds of spiritual peak experiences that you have had in any form or path that have shaped your life or your interest in astrology. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. I'm also going to take you over to my website because tonight we have my talk on the eighth house. If you would still like to attend, it's not too late to register. Click on that link, register now, for the eighth house, the place of karmic debts. It's this evening from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. You register, you get the link. And if you can't attend, you'll get the recording later. I also want to remind you, if you go to courses page, Astrology for Beginners is at the top. And if you click on it, you'll be taken over to our brand new course, Astrology for Complete Beginners. This is our Astrology Essentials program. It's all pre-recorded. There are 8 modules. This is meant for people who are brand new to astrology and looking for just something to help you put together the basic pieces of the language so that you understand a little bit more about what you're getting into. And this is also perfect for people who might be thinking about taking our first year training program, which is immersive, and for people who want to go professional or who are just doing this for your own spiritual benefit. So that first year program, if you're an absolute beginner, you might want to start here and then work your way into the first year program, which begins this fall. Anyway, the sale goes on through August 27th. So you can take advantage of the early bird rate of this kind of pre-registration sale. And then the course will be available mid-September, and normal registration will be available after the sale is over. So save a little bit if you want to take that class now, and maybe join us for our fall first year program after taking that introductory class. So anyway, now that we have said all of that, again, a few qualifiers. So those of you who don't know, I got into astrology. The gateway that really opened that for me was about a decade. Throughout all of my 20s, I started using psychedelics in medicinal, ritualistic, and very structured settings, guided, safe settings, I would describe. That's how I would describe my experiences in South Central America, traditions from Brazil and from Peru that I got involved with in my 20s, and utilized the work with ayahuasca to overcome opiate addiction in my early 20s, which was an amazing, life-changing part of my story. And also, it was these experiences with ayahuasca that opened the door for me to things like yoga, meditation, a regenerating of my early Christian upbringing, but in a more universal and sort of psychedelic context, you might say, sort of universalizing sort of a Christ consciousness vibe. But it also opened the door for me, especially to yoga, and owned a yoga studio for about a decade with my wife, and then astrology and the language of astrological archetypes and forms of divination like the tarot, I Ching, and astrology itself. So these things all came kind of flooding into my life after a number of the early psychedelic experiences that I had with ayahuasca. Of course, it was things like accidental, use of mushrooms, really just thinking I was going to get high and party like it was any other drug, and having a very unexpectedly spiritual experience. And those things kind of opened the door for me to get involved in more sacred and intentional ceremonial contexts with ayahuasca in South America. Now, this was back in like 2004. So I was getting involved in this quite a ways before some of the like massive popularity of ayahuasca and other entheogens. It wasn't quite what it wasn't quite what it was back then as it is now, if that makes sense. I think I said that right. Anyhow, so then for about a decade of my life, I wrote a book about ayahuasca. I went through 2 graduate school programs, going back and forth to Peru during off periods, and continuing to participate in ceremonies and doing a lot of personal growth and healing work, continuing to address my Christian upbringing, a lot of problems in my family that were taking place, my own mental and emotional health, and benefited tremendously from those experiences. All of that being said, I want to make it clear that there are many ways that people can heal and learn and grow. Just because this is the path that I took doesn't mean it's the right one or the only one. It doesn't mean it's the right one for everyone. So I can't officially recommend or tell anyone what to do, or whether or not an entheogenic path of healing is the right approach. And just because I talk about it doesn't mean that it's my intention to like glorify it as though everyone should do this, because there's always a few people who seem to think that whenever I talk about this part of my background. So let's just make that clear. The second thing that I want to say is that the insights that I had they are insights that many people have had in many different traditions. Meditation, prayer, altered states, dreams. There are many ways of getting in touch with, let's just call it spirit, and receiving insight or clarification or healing through spirit. So, all of that being said, I'd like to tell you a story that comes from one of my most memorable ayahuasca experiences that really shaped a lot of the way I do astrology, or at least an attitude that I have that was like, installing itself in my consciousness at the same time that I began formally studying and practicing astrology. So, without further ado, here's my story. I had a ceremony, and it was a very memorable, very powerful ceremony. And one reason that made it very powerful was that this was a ceremony that was largely uh, barf free. If you know anything about ayahuasca, you know that it is a purgative. And one of the things that happens is, as we are exploring different domains of our consciousness, our psychology, our history, our soul's karma, whatever you want to call it, there will often be encounters with patterns that become very vivid in your mind's eye and in your body. And there's a way in which a kind of releasing often happens when you face or encounter these patterns, through vomiting or through laughter or through crying or through sometimes going out the bottom. And it can be quite harrowing at times. But this was a unique ceremony for me in that there was none of that taking place. It was a very comfortable ceremony from the standpoint of, like, I wasn't feeling particularly sick. There wasn't a strong purgative element, which is nice because, frankly, I did over 100 ceremonies, and throughout my experience, the ceremonies where you're retching into a bucket can be pretty awful. So good for you. You feel wonderful. You see and are very aware most of the time of what you're releasing and what you're working through. Doesn't make it easy though. So it was kind of a night off, but it was a very, very intense ceremony in terms of the effects on my mental and intellectual state. It was an incredibly, what I would call, like, mental and intellectual space. I would describe the ceremony as though from start to finish, I was in a conversation with the intelligence of the plant spirits, which are, in my opinion, my humble opinion, very wise, ancient, and in a sense, like elder uh, is a kind of elder wisdom. I think of plant spirits that way. Of course, I've been indoctrinated by my herbalist wife, but that's actually part of why we met and fell in love, was that we felt the same way about plants. And so, anyway, so it was like a conversation with the plant intelligence. So it went like this. And I'm just going to give you like a highlight that I remember from it very vividly, even though this kind of experience that I'm going to describe went on for several hours. So it's hard to capture, it all in its essence. So I kind of created a script that resembles what happened. And I'm going to read it to you. So I got into this, as my journey with ayahuasca was progressing, and I feel it's the same for anyone on any spiritual path, psychedelic or not, you start really asking some of the most profound and authentic questions that you've ever asked. It often starts at the beginning of a spiritual path, like, why am I here? What is real? What is truth? Like this. Well, this was a ways into my ayahuasca experiences, more than 6 or 7 years. And so at this point, I was starting to ask questions that were a lot deeper. I was studying Eastern philosophy. I was delving into the history of astrology. I was really getting a lot into a much deeper space. And so I started asking questions that reflected some of my, like, where I was getting stuck philosophically. And so this is what happened. I found myself in touch with something. Some people describe ayahuasca as a grandmother, so whatever way you want to personify it, I felt like I was in touch with a very reliable source of like numinous divine wisdom. There's actually words that are used in like Quechua and Portuguese and the different traditions that I was a part of that it will actually talk about this kind of divine wisdom that you get in touch with often in ceremonies that we name in other religious and spiritual traditions as well. When you start in prayer, you hear the voice of the divine, whatever. So this felt like that to me. So I'll just qualify it by that. And I started asking, I just said, is anything actually real? And I was talking, of course, in my mind, I was referring to like material experience, the body, the world, experience in the world, other people. And I was at this point, as many people do, I was getting into questions about duality and non-duality through Eastern philosophy and stuff like that. So is anything actually real? And the answer was yes. And I said, but isn't it true, because I've been reading about this, that everything in duality is like an illusion? Yes. Okay. And it just kept going like this. I started getting the answer yes in this perfect. It's funny because in the way that the word yes was spoken, in the way I was receiving it in the state of consciousness, it was like it might as well have been like that om, that sort of simple syllable of everything at once, and a affirmation of everything. Very profound experience for me. So I started reflecting on my Christian upbringing, and I said, is Christianity the right path? Is it true that Jesus is the only son of God? Like the questions like this, right? Yes. Just like golden towers of yes. Like, well, of course, my intellect is like, well, what about Buddhism? Is Buddhism the right path? It's very different, has very different claims. It's not the same metaphysically. It's not the same philosophically. Yes. Just like this, over and over and over. Is yoga the right path? Yes. Is there even a right path at all among all of these paths? Yes. Okay, let's get even bigger. Is duality actually real? I thought duality was an illusion. Is it real? Yes. But what about duality being an illusion? I thought duality was an illusion. Isn't it true that duality is illusory? Yes. Okay. These are other examples of things I asked. Do my choices matter? Yes. Is everything destined or fated or organized? Yes. Is time real? Yes. Well, I thought that time was a kind of illusion. Isn't everything eternal and co-present and simultaneous? Yes. Can I ever understand anything? Because this is all so confounding that it makes me feel like it's pointless to try to understand anything. So, can I actually understand anything? Yes. Isn't this all just too much for the human mind to comprehend? Yes. Is enlightenment, past lives, karma, are these all actually real? Yes. Is enlightenment, past lives, karma, isn't it some kind of unnecessary illusion that we suffer from though? I mean, should we really pay so much attention to enlightenment, past lives, karma? Isn't it all an illusion? Yes. Is what about pain? Is it real? Yes. Can pain be healed? Yes. Is pain an illusion? Yes. Is suffering necessary? Yes. Is suffering an illusion to be overcome? Yes. It was just like this. And I'm not kidding when I tell you it was like a couple of hours. Are we supposed to live for spiritual rather than material things while we're here on earth because the earth is a kind of trap or prison that will throw some kind of cloak of ignorance over us? Yes. But what about this world being sacred? Isn't it divine too? Isn't it perfect? Isn't it something we're supposed to enjoy and live and taste? Yes. And it just went on and on like this. I know, like, on the out there's a part of me that was like, didn't even wanna tell this story because I feel like telling it, I'm just like a cartoon caricature of some dude getting high, just sounding like an idiot. And for all we know, the voice saying yes is like Beavis or Butthead on his couch somewhere, you know? What do I know? But, what happened was at a certain point, this constant asking of questions and probing and dissecting and getting nothing more than yes. This this complete affirmation of everything everywhere all at once. I think that was a movie that came out recently. Duality and non-duality. Total yes to both. I mean, really, really mind-blowing for me. This for as I don't know, as cliched and cartoonish as this may sound, this was a life-changing experience for me. And finally, I finally just got to the point where and I was relentless, right? Because something in my mind is in relentless pursuit of understanding and truth. And the voice answering was calm and present. And the voice was a mantra more than an answer, if that makes sense. And so finally, what I became, or the way my consciousness changed toward the end of those couple of hours worth of this repetitive experience was someone just sitting and breathing. And I don't mean that in any kind of formal meditative sense. I don't mean any kind of bullshit posturing. I mean, my mind was literally just not doing anything. it just, it was just quiet. And I was just sitting there. And then simultaneously, there were images in my mind. Like in my mind's eye, I could see images, like archetypal images of people meditating and in prayer or in trance states. And I recognized it is not more complicated than what I'm doing. Those are images. And often when we think of spirituality, we glom onto the images of people doing these things and words like holiness and guru and mystic. And actually, it's just as simple as someone who has said the word yes enough to just be sitting there quietly. It was profound because for me, it rewrote what meditation is. It went from something that was a romanticized sort of fantasy image of meditation in my mind to something that was just super simple. It was like just sitting there. And that I had been like yesed into just sitting and just like being there. I think that this experience is common. When we're in it, we often don't know we're in it because we have images of what we think it means to be in it that prevent us from recognizing when we're in it. And it's just as simple as just sitting. Like, I find that sometimes I'll be sitting on my porch in the evening. We have these two rocking chairs, and I'll be sitting there with my wife, and there'll be a couple of minutes where it's just quiet. There's not a lot on my mind. Couldn't even tell you what I was thinking. It reminds me of that. It's just so simple. And what I saw and what I became was someone just sitting and breathing, and just the simple presence of being there, sitting on the wood floor in a little like a little mesa in the jungle in South America. And I just had this feeling that there doesn't need to be anything more or less than this. Just me sitting here. And everything that is possible is in some ways real, and there's jack shit to actually do about it. It doesn't need me to do anything about it. And it's also not offended if I choose to. It's an incredible, liberating, humbling, freeing, enriching kind of realization. Anyway, it's been really hard for me ever since that particular experience, although there were others that, I don't know, did similar things, like a lot, like 100 ayahuasca ceremonies do a lot of different things, but that particular experience just, I guess, well, I have some takeaways I want to share with you, but it's been hard for me to not recall that experience and how I relate to astrology in particular and to like life in general. So I called this episode Humility and the Cosmic Yes. And because I would say the biggest single takeaway that I had from that experience was a real understanding of what humility is and what it feels like when you're in it, when I'm in it. Like a bodily recognition of what humility looks like. Can I understand some things about life? Yes. Is it too much for me to understand? Yes. And when I can just sit with that, for me, that was the feeling of humility. It's like a tension between knowing and not knowing, being and not being, duality and non-duality. It's just an ability to say yes to all of it. And when I say yes to all of it, there's this, it's like being on a bicycle. You're tilting back and forth as you're first learning to drive it. But humility is somehow the ability to keep just gently correcting back to your center of gravity, where you're nothing more or less. You're both and. You're sitting in the place of like yes. And the real place of yes is not a place that has to take you to any like extraordinary heights, and it also doesn't crash you. And you don't need anything more or less because it's all right there. These things that I'm saying have been said by so many different people in so many different traditions. So I don't pretend like any of this should ring out like some glorious undiscovered truth. Like, but this was one of the ways that I had an experience of things that a lot of different spiritual people, people with spiritual insight have talked about. And so anyway, there's three takeaways and three ways in which this experience has shaped me as an astrologer. One is that I turn archetypes, and I do this on the channel, so you guys should be familiar with this, but I do this for myself. And this is why I do it on the channel, because it's the way that I've learned to approach astrology. So it's the way I share astrology. I turn archetypes. So if it's Moon Mars, or if it's Saturn Jupiter, or whatever the case, Venus Uranus, whatever the case it might be, I turn archetypes and listen to the reflections and ideas and patterns that they suggest. And then I turn them again, and then again, and then again. And I find myself saying yes. And yeah, look at this angle. And yes, this one. And if I keep turning an archetype, And then being able to connect that contemplative act to the living of the archetypal experiences that the archetypes signify, you know? So if I'm turning the jewel of Venus and Uranus as a kind of intellectual meditation, seeing the mandala of images and themes and philosophical ideas that are presented through the combination of planets, and then I'm able to bring that reflection into the experience of my life where the symbols come alive, and I can then see the multidimensionality of my experience. It resembles that yes, 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 yes. And in that, I find myself in this the fullness of something that's very present. And it frequently, by continuing to turn the jewel, takes me from certainty about my experiences to multidimensionality, to a kind of humble uh, deconstructing and reconstructing of the nature of my experiences so that I can just keep saying yes to all the different sides and facets and, you know, reflections of light that are coming through. That's why I keep turning the jewels of the archetypes on my channel. Is that's what I learned to do with thoughts. And thoughts are archetypal. They're the playground of the gods. Number 2, I don't need to be anything more or less than what I am. And it's also okay if I end up trying to be more or less than what I am. All roads lead back to the golden presence. Now, I use the word golden presence because the image in that particular ceremony, when I kept hearing yes, were like these golden pillars, just strong and beautiful and true and sort of filled with like tons of different things simultaneously. Anyway, um, one of the ways that I'm frequently practicing astrology, and I think it conveys in the way I create content, is I'm constantly looking at our astrological experiences as an opportunity to come back to the very simple affirmation of what we already are, what we always have been, what we always will be. There's always a temptation in astrology to think I've got to use this energy. This energy is part of the description of a step I have to take on route to a better me or a more evolved or more spiritual me. And for me, the constant turning of the jewel deconstructs the temptation that I have to make every single astrological event and every experience in life about an opportunity to get something or to develop something or to grow something or to become something. Like those are fine endeavors. There's nothing wrong with them. But the way I tend to do astrology is about continually turning the jewels until we deconstruct the feeling that we need to be anything or anywhere other than who we are and where we are. And that the constant reflection on the archetypes and hence on our experiences liberates us from the trap of progress. It's not that progress isn't beautiful, it's that it's archetypal. Is progress real? Yes. Is progress an illusion? Yes. Listening and considering, contemplating, and taking things in leads me back to the golden temple of presence within. So I think now, after a lot of my psychedelic experiences, the richest and most healing of those experiences, as things that taught me how to be a listener, how to be curious, how to be contemplative, and how to ask good questions, right? So one of the things I that I've one of the ways in which I've always approached astrology, and that you'll see me presenting astrology on my channel, comes from the idea that every astrological configuration is an oper it's like a drishti in meditation. It's like a meditative, contemplative object that I can circumambulate, that I can walk around with metaphorical prayer beads. And that by listening and considering and contemplating archetypes and then seeing archetypes in experiences, even experiences that I'm totally enmeshed in, that the experiences and the living of life become a kind of archetypal contemplative meditation. And that is just, it's life becomes like a moving prayer. And so the way that I try to do astrology is by bringing us into this kind of prayerful moving around our experiences with the use of symbols and archetypes, which, if we continue doing it as a way of life, what you'll notice is that you move from being so identified with experiences that you're just riding the roller coaster to having some reflective space. And that reflective space is exactly the space you need to find that yes, 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 which is like the breath or the heartbeat. It is the simple truth that holds all of this incredibly paradoxical, vast reality in place. Yes, yes, yes. All right. I'm going to end it there today. Gone into mystical territory here. I hope that this was fun and interesting. Again, the purpose of this series is not to exalt psychedelics. It is not to exalt my own experiences. It's to share them. And just to say, this is part of how I've been shaped, and how, in particular, the intersection of psychedelics, entheogens, these specific traditions have intersected with my path as an astrologer and continue to come forth in the content that you're listening to. If nothing else, you can know more about me as a content creator, know more about my backstory, and reflect upon your own spiritual path. And what parallel experiences have you had through other modalities or other traditions? Some people may feel called to do things like entheogens, or to work, there's a lot of people now that are doing microdosing with therapists, or all sorts of therapies utilizing entheogens. And I generally support those things. I have also seen enough and experienced enough to know that not all practitioners and places are safe, to know that there's danger out there. You have to be careful, and to know that you can't just go trucking off expecting that every single person will benefit or receive the same thing. Right. So, it's not for everybody. Those experiences are very powerful. And I recommend, before anyone ever considers them, that you really look carefully at, and you do your research and make sure that anyone that you're working with, whether it's in South America or wherever, is reputable and safe, and has their feet on the ground with their heart in the right place. It's very important. So I say all of those things again because anytime you bring up this subject, you run the risk of potentially sort of like Neptunizing it and not taking a moment to recognize that it's not like for every single person. So anyway, that's it for today. And I hope that you're having a good one. And hopefully we'll see some of you tonight for this talk on the 8th house. Don't forget the beginner's course is on sale as well. We'll see you again tomorrow.